Hey, this is Pastor Jay, and welcome to another broadcast of The Agenda, the podcast of the River of Life Christian Center of Orlando, Florida, where we deal with all things relating to culture, Christianity, and the church. We have a very special podcast tonight because we're going to be talking to musicians and looking at the relationship between the church, the pastor, and musicians. And I've got two awesome guests with us tonight. Both of them are musicians here at the River of Life Christian Center, and they're also professional musicians. And I'll start all the way over to my right with Jaylen. Go ahead, man, and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, and what the Lord is doing with your gift right now.
Yeah, so I'm Jaylen Moore. I play the drums. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. Good old country boy. Grew up in the church, been in church all my life. I've been able to experience the entire world. I've been all over the world playing for a few musicians, gospel to R&B to the local jazz scene to hip hop. You know, I've done it all, and I've been blessed to just, experience a few things.
James, how old are you? You're pretty young, right?
I'm 28. I'll be 29 on Friday.
Be 29 on Friday.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Our next guest is Ed Anderson. Ed, you've been at the River for a while.
Yeah, it's been over 10 years now.
I think you do music, production, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yep, Ed Anderson, Florida, homegrown from St. Pete, Tampa Bay area. Been at the River for over 10 years now, and I'm the band director here at the River, playing keys. And also I do music production under my own, music production company, Edge Music, and then as well as the local jazz scene, and had the opportunity to travel a little bit with different gospel artists and things of that nature. It's been, really good. God has been faithful.
If anybody wants information about what you do on a professional level as a producer, how can they get in touch with you?
I actually have a website and Instagram and Facebook, so www.edgemusicllc.com. And then also at Edge Music LLC on Facebook, Instagram. And
Jaylen, you've worked with a lot of professional musicians. I know one of the first professional musicians that I knew of that you worked with directly was Todd Delany. You toured with him for a good while, right?
Yes, sir.
What was that like?
So I was a fan of Todd before I actually started playing for him. And he came to Florida. In 2016, and he needed a substitute drummer. And so I ended up filling in for his main drummer, me and a few other local artists. And he enjoyed me. It was a great time. And he told me I was one of his favorite musicians. And I didn't believe him because he's from Chicago.
You guys look alike.
I'm a lot more handsome than he is. Let me just put that out there. Todd, if you see this, I'm way more handsome than you. But he's from Chicago,
right?
And they have so many amazing musicians, especially drummers there.
Right.
So him saying that to me was like, whatever. And so he called me 2 weeks later and was like, "You want to go to Uganda?" I'm like, Africa? Yes. And so from there, just kicked off a journey with him for about 6 years.
Okay.
And man, my life was changed. I was able to experience a lot of different cultures, a lot of different environments, a lot of different atmospheres, been able to navigate certain situations like just crazy activity in the church and just powerful opportunity, like powerful worship experiences. And so I was exposed to a lot of different things, and it kind of just shaped me to who I am today, a lot of who I am today.
Now, did you grow up in the church playing music? Or
yes, I grew up in church. My grandmother was a pastor.
Oh, wow.
So
that's what you get, that little oil, because every now and then...
I got a little oil on me, but no, she was a pastor, grew up apostolic Pentecostal, word-based, like extremely strong foundation in the word. And I grew up, I was 3 years old when I say I was 3 years old. I have no idea when I actually started playing, but my brother played before me. And I've seen him playing, and I feel like it was like a gravitational pull to the drums.
Right.
Like I can't even explain what it was.
That's how you chose that particular instrument?
Yes. I guess I've seen him play, but something was just in me to just be on the drums all the time. You had to pull me off after church just to get, I would cry if I couldn't be on the drums.
Right.
And so he went and did his own thing, and then that was when I kind of was able to step in and kind of see the environment and take control of an environment, because that's what happens. You actually have to take control as a musician, you have to walk in an authority.
Right.
Because you, like, especially as a drummer, like, you are the heartbeat of the entire musician arena. You
lay the foundational beat.
Exactly. And so that was like my first experience with it, growing up in the church and kind of being able to be terrible and be good and trying to work through all the little kinks. So exactly.
Yeah,
what about you, Ed? Your history with church and music? Did you start out in the church?
I did. My parents are still pastors to this day over in St. Pete, and I actually started out playing drums too. So drums is actually my first love. Just back as far as I can remember, I started doing that, just beating on everything. And then when I was right about 14, 15 years old, I ended up transitioning over to teaching myself how to play keys. I picked up keys by ear.
Is that right?
Didn't take lessons, just studied it, and God had given me the gift to be able to hear something and then sit down and play it, like figure it out and play it. And I literally, that started the journey of me teaching myself to play. And to this day, I've still been investing in that gift, investing in that skill and that craft, and that's where I've been to the point now where I play more keys, definitely more keys than drums. But it's been cool how God has allowed me to cross paths with incredible musicians and people, in many different places, including, the group that I have, the ability to work with here at the River. I play with world-class musicians every week. I serve with world-class musicians every week. And it's just truly been like an honor, and it's cool being able to kind of live that life and develop that out.
So all of us basically kind of grew up in church, and we've seen different things and experienced different things in the church. And during this segment of the podcast, I wanted us to talk about the relationship between the pulpit and musicians, because we've seen and observed abuses throughout our years, and a lot of the musicians, even secular musicians, got their start in the church, but for one reason or the other, they left where they got that foundational start and went out into the world. And I think there's a lot of contributing factors, things that contributed to that, and that's what I want to talk about today, because I listen to musicians, and a lot of musicians that I've talked to, when you talk about church hurt, you can tell it kind of oozes out. And I saw something on social media that was kind of funny, where you could tell that the relationship between the pastor and the musician wasn't there, because he was telling the guy to stop playing, and when he told the drummer to stop, the drummer would keep playing, then he'd look over and he'd go again, and I thought that was just so disrespectful. But I think a lot of that came from, it didn't just start with that particular instance. There was something behind that that led to that display of disrespect and discord between the pastor and the musician. And I said that to say this. Now, my experience has been coming from the Baptist church, where I was for most of my formative years. I saw situations where it seemed like the pastor was more concerned about the talent aspect that the musician brought to the church, but he was not concerned about the actual spiritual welfare of that individual. In other words, yes, you play well, but when you leave the instrument, when you leave the church, how are you living? And I said that to say this. Before I came here, I was in Miami, and I wasn't a pastor, but I was a minister at our local church. Again, it was the Baptist church. And one night, I was just praying, just doing intercessory prayer in my house, not bothering nobody. And back during those days, I would just lay on the floor and pray, right? So I'm praying, and when I'm praying, I hear the Lord say, call so-and-so. And I overlooked it the first time. And he just kept saying, call so-and-so. And I knew this guy. I mean, he was my friend, but I also knew, I didn't know for sure, but I knew he had certain tendencies and ways that kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And so I got up and I called him, and we were just talking, and I said, and I want to call his name because he's deceased now. He and his wife, they're both deceased, as a matter of fact, and they had to do with this phone call. And I said, hey man, I said, how are you doing? And he told me, just casual conversation. I said, no, and I called his name. I said, how are you doing? And again, he brushed over it and just kept talking like I said, no, so-and-so. I said, God told me to call you and ask you, how are you doing? And sure enough, this guy was involved in some homosexual activities and some other stuff. And long story short, he ended up contracting HIV and AIDS, gave it to his wife, and now they're both in glory. When I came up in my home church as a little kid, because I started singing when I was like 10 or 12 in church, we had a little junior choir, you have A selection, B selection, this, that, and the other. But I knew there was something about the guy that brought me into music that wasn't like totally masculine. I mean, it is there. And everybody knew it, but nobody said anything about it. Do you think sometimes that as pastors, we fail to be concerned about you on a spiritual level, and the only thing we're concerned about is how well you play. Can you stir up the crowd? Can you get us to that place where we enter in, so to speak?
I mean,
You wanna-
sure. I mean, we both can. Sure.
So
Go for it.
I think yes, for sure. But I also think there's both sides to it. Like, there's some pastors that care, and then there's some pastors that don't at all. My personal experience, I grew up in my grandmother's church. So
you know she was watching. You know she was on it.
I mean, she didn't care about how good you was. And it didn't matter the perception of the church. So like, I got set down. I'm extremely transparent, just in case y'all. I'm very transparent. I got set down when I was like 15 or 16 for doing some foolishness, and she just didn't care about the fact that I needed to practice. I needed repetition. I needed to do this. What I did was more important because I wasn't living a holy life. I wasn't living a righteous life. So my personal experience with that has been, I've been under leadership that cares, but I've also experienced from other people's own situations where they care more about the gift, more about what you bring to the table, more about the presentation of the worship experience, more than your actual soul. And so
Did you appreciate her being concerned about your soul as opposed to a pastor that just
not in the moment, I
15,
did. Not in the moment.
But now, looking back in retrospect.
Absolutely, because one of the things that I didn't realize, I think, at the time was what I do affects other people. The life I live and like music is spiritual.
Right.
And so even in my gift as well, I want to have clean hands when I step on the drums, when I play those drums. And it's I'm not always pure. I'm not always that. But I try my best to have clean hands when I go up there, because I'm a living sacrifice. I want to be clean and holy and acceptable. I want God to use me, because what I'm doing is setting atmospheres that's conducive for God to dwell in.
Right.
And so I want to be able to be pure, and I want to be able to hear the voice of God and move in the direction that He's telling me to move, or play the way I want to, the way He wants me to play. Right. And so all of that kind of, plays a big role. Like if you just live in any type of way, you can't hear what He's saying. You can't hear where He's telling you to go. You can't be sensitive to the atmosphere or what's happening around you. And so I mean that's kind of my experience and my take on it. So.
Yeah, 100%. If I can add on that, I think sometimes people fail to realize that even as musicians, we're like people and we're believers first.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? And so when we've been able to sit under pastors who care about it, it's because they realize that, hey, before you're a musician, you're a person, and you have to deal with regular everyday issues and spiritual things just like the rest of us do. And if we don't deal with those issues first, then it affects how you're able to perform your service. You know what I mean? And then I've been around where some just don't care, and it's because a lot of times it's because, they feel like what the musician brings to the table is the most beneficial to that ministry. I'll sacrifice your soul to make sure we meet our quota, so y'all can play this good music, so we can do whatever we're trying to do. And that's a rough situation to be in. I've seen musicians, whose marriages have fallen apart, while they were waiting to get a meeting with the pastor, to get marriage counseling and to have conversations, about how do I address this? How do I fix this? And because that never happened, like, people's lives are falling apart at the same time.
Now, both of you have worked with musicians on national levels. What about, like, when you're traveling and when you're touring, and you see guys who are musicians whose life, what they're doing in a spiritual context, their life is not reflective of that? I mean, do you talk to them? Do you put them in check, or just kind of don't put anybody on blast, or do you just keep on going?
Go ahead.
I mean, I feel like depending on what role I'm playing in that tour, like, or in that, in that particular area of ministry, like if I'm called on to be the leader of that band, then I'm being accountable. And, you know, the artist that we're playing for, this is a gospel artist, or this is, you know, a Christian artist where, you know, everything that we do is under a microscope. Our example, you know, it's not just about what we're doing as we're playing. The example of our life is you know, even more important than what we do when we're on stage, because, you know, people are looking at that. People can see that. So, you know, if I'm in a leadership position in that particular group, then hey, maybe I might check them and say, hey, you know, obviously you're grown, you're an adult, you know what I mean? But if you're going to represent, you know, the brand, represent not just the brand, but represent the ministry of what we're doing. Because think about it, like if you think about it from a business standpoint, if I am doing something that misrepresents the company that I'm working for, then that company can fire me, right? You see it happen all the time. Well, it's the same thing in the spiritual side of it. Like if I'm misrepresenting the quote unquote spiritual brand of the assignment that I'm called there to do, like it affects how my business and how that brand is now perceived, the reputation of that business. And what that does spiritually is it confuses people. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's like I would rather, you know, us not be in a position where we're misrepresenting what we're standing there to actually represent.
Well, let's segue into the business aspect of it, because you mentioned the business aspect of it. You were here at the church. It was in 2015. I was getting ready to go on vacation, and I was just being facetious, you know, because when I grew up, I'll tell you where the statement came from. When I grew up, because I wasn't a pastor, I didn't know anything about if the musician was paid or not. But as I grew in church and I was, you know, got familiar with ministers, I would hear people say, well, you know, you pray, you playing for the Lord, you know, and so you should just be happy for playing for the Lord. And it was looked down and frowned upon if you sought or you used your gift and other means to get income. So I was getting ready to leave and go on vacation, and I made a statement. I said, musicians playing in the club, then turn around and playing on Sunday. And man, this one guy, I mean, everybody jumped on that feed, but this one guy, he was more vicious in his attack, and I could tell it was because it came from a hurt place. But that whole conversation opened my eyes to something that I had never thought about, and that's professional musicians. That yeah, you guys play on Sunday, but you got to live. You know, you still have to earn an income, and so that's when my eyes were opened as it relates to professional musicians, and that brings me back to compensation. What's your gift worth? Because sometimes you hear people use the term hireling, you know.
Sure.
Now, this is my thing. I believe if a person is good, pay them like they're good, you know. And a lot of people that started out in church left the church altogether because not only was the emotional hurt from some of the things that they experienced, but they also like, I got to live, I got to eat too, you know. How do you guys feel about that?
I think every situation...
And pastors being cheap.
You know, I think every situation is different. Like, some churches require more of you. Some churches require little of you. If you're capable, if the church is asking you for a lot, and you're capable of delivering what they're asking for.
What do you mean when you say asking you for a lot? Like,
you there every week, you there every day, actually, maybe 4 or 5 times a week.
And you remember back in the day, y'all don't remember this, but churches would have like other services after the main service where they went someplace else.
Speaking to that, I mean,
we remember.
I grew up in the church, so
playing all day.
We had Sunday school, then we had 12 o'clock service, then we had 5:30 service. It was all day long. Church was on, and then we would have youth service on Tuesday, Bible study on Wednesday, rehearsal on Thursday, Bible study on Friday. So that was, and then my granddad would go to the church and preach outside on Saturday. So I know about that.
And you had to be at all of them.
I was always there. I was always at the church. But if a church is requiring you to be there on Sunday, you got 2 or 3 services on Sunday. That alone requires a lot of time to rehearse. Like I think a lot of times we overlook the preparation for the service itself. On top of the fact that we've spent years and years and years preparing ourselves and cultivating our gifts and you know, perfecting our skills and all of the things that require us to be ready when it's time for us to do 2 or 3 services.
Right.
And then you want us there maybe it's Tuesday for a rehearsal, Wednesday service, or third, whatever it is. You want to be like, I want to know that my time and my gift is worth it. You know what I mean? Because I have to live, and so I do this as a profession.
Man, you should just be happy. You praying for the Lord. You playing for the Lord.
I can play for the Lord at the house. We play for the Lord at the house.
I'm very grateful.
Like, we are very thankful for that.
I have to pay bills.
Right.
At the end of the day, like my mortgage it needs to be paid. My wife is at home. If I'm gonna be leaving her, she wants me to be getting some money. She's like, "Where are you bringing in?" You know what I mean? And so that's just what it is. Bills are going to be there, and if I'm going to be spending time on something, it's going to be to make some money. Yeah. And not just.
I was thinking about what you were saying, because I used to do professional photography, and I just stopped doing it because, if I did a photo shoot with somebody, they always wanted the hookup. And they didn't think about the hours that I spent learning the gift. They didn't think about the cost of the equipment that I had to use. They don't think about after I take those photos have to be edited.
It's a lot.
They didn't think about the travel time or the gas. They just wanted the hiccup. I mean the hookup, Ed, how do you speak to that?
I mean, I completely agree with you.
How much is a keyboard, bro?
I mean, listen, okay. So I have in my house right now 4 different keyboards. The cheapest one is still over $1,000.
Right.
You know what I mean? The most expensive one is like $4,000. And then on top of that, like, if we're talking about preparing ourselves for the worship experience, sometimes that requires, hey, maybe I got to make stems, maybe we got to make loops, maybe we have to go through and dissect parts and split things apart so that we can be effective in our rehearsals, because we rehearse once a week for an hour and a half. You know what I mean? Like, that means we have to be prepared with stuff when we come in. We don't have time to sit down and just be trying to learn stuff on the fly.
Right.
So all of that requires hours of preparation and years of honing our gifts and skills. It's kind of like, if you go into a doctor's office, right, and you expect for that doctor to render you a quick diagnosis when you go in for something, and when he asks you for whatever that bill is, you're like, it's like, oh, it was only a 15-minute appointment. Doesn't matter. I've got 20 years of experience learning and studying and doing case studies and all these things to give me the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to be able to do what I do as well as I do, as quick as I do. People don't think about that when in terms of musicians. Right. We didn't just start playing yesterday. You know what I mean? So if we're going to approach it from a pro level, it's different if you have somebody that's just starting or they're just learning. Okay, cool. Like, invest in that gift. I get it. Their gifts, might not be worth as much from a compensation standpoint because of the time it takes them to put in. They're still learning. But if you got people that got a resume, like, man, like, they're professionals.
Right. It goes a little bit beyond that too. Don't be late all the time.
Don't be late but exactly.
Come prepared. Like, if you're gonna, we gave you the music. Come prepared. Know the music.
How do you guys deal with that when you're working with other musicians, because you never play by yourself? Basically, there's a team. How do you deal with a person that doesn't have a spirit of excellence and they don't prepare, and you've invested your time, you ready, and this guy like slides in late, hasn't studied or practiced what he's supposed to do? How do you guys deal with that?
Man, we have standards in place. For me, like, so I've never had to fire anybody because I am very upfront and transparent about the standards that we're pushing towards. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Like, I try to make sure, like, from a leadership standpoint, if I'm going to, direct this band, these are the standards that we have in place, and people come up to the standard. And truth be told, because we're in church, if they don't meet the standard, they'll quickly move on. Like, they'll take themselves out of the game. You know what I mean? And at the same time, it's like, if things need to be addressed, I address it. Like, hey, we got to tighten up, guys. We've been late. Like, we all need to be in place on time because we're ready to go. Like, this is what's happening. What we're doing is setting off a chain reaction that's making other stuff out of whack. We got to be on our stuff. We don't have, and especially considering we're a paid musician. If you're going to treat it like a job, you on time to your regular job, right? Let's be on time. Let's know what we need to do so that we can perform excellently. And that, even like, when we do that, it continues to validate, the fact that we are being paid the way we're being paid. Why? Because we're showing up and doing an excellent job. Because a person who works and is good at what they do deserves to be paid like they're good at what they do.
Now, on the agenda, we deal with culture. and how culture has affected and shaped the church and Christianity and our theology over the years. Now, when I grew up in church, we just did the Broadman, the thing, what a friend we have in Jesus,
the hymns.
The hymns. That was basically, and so that's how I grew up. But I've seen music evolve, and I think one of the first experiences that I had personally watching music evolve in the church with Edwin Waters and Andre Crouch back when they came along, because they broke away, they broke that mold. What I want to ask you guys now, do you think that Christian music is sounding too secular now, and do you ever get any blowback, or have you experienced, well, this isn't church music? I've heard people actually say that this isn't church music. What is church music, and where's it going?
Man, you got it's okay. So
That's a deep one.
That's a deep one. I got to take the deep breath. Music is constantly evolving and changing, because, like we talked about, Paul talks about in the Bible, I got to be all things to all people in order to win some. Right? Okay. Well, there are people out there whose souls we're trying to reach as church musicians, as in the worship experience, who aren't gonna resonate with the hymns.
Not at all.
They're not going to. There has to be something that's there, because truth be told, if you strip away all lyrics from music is nothing but feeling, and it's a vehicle. Music is the vehicle that carries the lyrics. The lyrics is the message that we're trying to get into people.
That's good.
Right? That's all it is. Music is just a vehicle. But some people aren't going to receive the lyrics, the actual important thing, the message, if the vehicle isn't right. If you drive a hoopty, ain't no girl gonna come up to you looking at you like I can't get with you because the vehicle's not there.
In other words, you're not gonna reach the 20 or the 30 somethings with what a friend we have in Jesus.
Correct. Not unless I repackage it.
Unless they grew up and understand it.
Right.
That's something that's a culture that you have to understand.
Right.
Like, my wife didn't grow up in church. So there's things literally.
I think sometimes as pastors we forget that.
Yeah,
everybody didn't come up in church like we did.
There's things that I am used to and understand that she literally is like, why y'all even doing that? Why y'all saying the same thing 15, 20 times? Like, I get it. Why y'all keep saying it? Like, she doesn't understand it. So it's you have to be relatable, something tangible for people that didn't grow up like us.
Right.
That's a different culture. That's a different generation. So
yeah,
bro, it has changed, because I remember church when you had a drum, and y'all not gonna believe this, but people used to bring like a washboard to church,
or a bent up hanger.
And I remember one time this lady came to the church and asked if she could do her tambourine thing, and I'm like, no, sweetie, we don't do tambourines. But on the flip side of that, can we push that envelope too far? And I said that to say this past Easter, there was a lot of controversy. I'm not going to mention the ministry or whatnot, but I'm going to be honest with you. I saw maybe 5 minutes, no, it wasn't even that long, of the Grammys with the red background and whatnot. Then this controversy broke out in the church. And when I looked at both clips, just glancing at them, it's like you couldn't tell one thing from the other unless you sat there and knew that this was a church, as opposed to because the colors were the same, the dance. We in church we classify stuff. We call it the holy dance. You got the holy dance, and then you got the secular dance. And I'm like, what is this? So do you think that we can actually push that border too far in an effort to be seeker friendly, or to, in other words, can we be slaves to the culture in the church?
I believe you can.
From a musical standpoint.
I believe you can. There has to be. There's a scripture in the New Testament, I believe it's in Timothy, where it talks about the differentiation of sounds. Like, who's gonna know when to go to war if you hear the alarm and the sounds are the same? You can't differentiate, because nobody knows what message is being portrayed. So there are points where I feel like, if we're pushing too much, and it's the intent behind it too, like if we're pushing too much into a quote unquote secular sound to make it user or seeker friendly without the right intentions behind what we're trying to do and placing things properly, then it can get lost. The intentions can get lost. But I feel like in order for us to reach some, like, there are those who are not churched. We can't approach things from the same direction all the time, and music is very progressive. Like,
and you know what? I think it's a slippery slope, because
it can be. That's why you got to pray.
I think what people and some musicians who are not familiar with the Bible fail to realize that Satan started off Lucifer as a musician. And just Lucifer, he's called son of the morning, or the morning star, you know. And I think within all of us, you know, there's something in all of us where we want to be seen. We kind of want to be a star on a certain level. And you just have to be careful, because that is his area of expertise, is music. Now, as pastors, we used to call the music department the war department, because that's where fights would always break out in the choir and all kinds of stuff like that. But then too, there's something else, because there are musicians that have started in the church that were excellent, and for one reason or the other, church hurt, they kind of eased out. And we talked about this before. You know, Tony, what was his name before?
Tony.
He was Tony.
Tony. Now he's
man. This dude is like a church Michael Jackson. I mean, he's got the dance, he's got everything, but he started out in the church. And then we also talked about Leandria, you know, who has an awesome gift, but at the same time, she'll turn around and cuss all the people in the church out. You know, where does this come from? How do we have a perfect gift or this awesome God-given talent? Because these talents come from the Lord. How do they get perverted and twisted, and a person gets hurt to the point where they just abandon the church altogether?
Man, gifts and vessels, man. I feel like, remember, having a gift doesn't negate the fact that we're still human beings that have to process emotions and have to deal with feelings and have to deal with conflict and have to deal with, you know, issues. You know what I mean? And sometimes people, like, I've been guilty of it, and I've also been a victim of it, where people will, you know, because I am a musician, they expect that I should only be a certain way. And so the perception that they have of me and how they deal with me is only in this light, when they forget, I'm a human too. You know what I mean? And so it goes kind of back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, checking in on musicians and knowing that they're good, and not just lumping that whole thing into one. Like, remember, we are musicians, we're specialists, but at the end of the day, we're people too. And so when you've been hurt, when you've had your feelings hurt, or when you've had these conflicts and stuff like that, I get it. You know what I mean? And, you know, when you agree, like these things happen, and it's like, all right, sometimes it's easier for me not to even deal with y'all.
But from a spiritual standpoint, you know, the devil knows that you're talented.
Of course.
You know, and it's like musicians have to pray and read too to stay on top of their spiritual game, because if Satan is a deceiver, it's easier for him to deceive you and to get something that God gave you to be a blessing to the body, and now flip that and pervert it, and now you're doing something crazy. But we got a few minutes before we have to end this podcast, but I want to ask you guys about something else that I want to understand as a pastor. I know you guys are tired when you're playing, but it's just like, when guys do their set, like praise and worship, then they just go back and they either go out and walk around or do whatever. You know, are you guys listening to the message and getting your spiritual nourishment? Or do you think they're musicians that just come to the church and play and do their thing, disconnect, and that's it? You know, they just come in, do their thing, and that's it. They're not concerned about the message, their spiritual growth. They just want to get that paycheck.
There are both that exist.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing.
That and
I think there is a hard thing to it, but I also think sometimes when we are going hard, getting off the stage is a moment for us all to decompress. Okay. I know I can't speak for everybody, but for me, it's a moment to decompress for a moment. Agree. I can sometimes get caught up in the decompress, and the word has been done, and now it's time to go back up, like where I done missed the whole word. But as far as wanting the word and wanting to hear, you know, some people just go to a church just to go there and get a check. But this is my home church, so I need this is where I receive the word. This is where I get my tithes. This is where I'm fed and also serve. So for me, my heart wants the word as well. Not every musician is like that.
Not everyone is like that. You're absolutely right. Not every musician is like that.
What do you do? Because for me, this has been the challenge. I'm kind of used to it now, but it was so hard the first time we did it. When, like, I trust Anthony, who's one of the hosts of the broadcast. If we need a musician or somebody leaves or we need to, I trust his judgment. And one of the things I'll ask him, and I'll tell him this all the time, I'm not concerned about their gift as opposed to who are they as an individual. Are they going to sync with the other music? Because sometimes y'all don't get along, you know. And but my concern is the priority is not on your gift. I don't care how you can play until the paint melts on the walls. But what kind of individual are you? Do you have a relationship with the Lord? And is there going to be a sync with the other musicians that we have in place? have you ever been in a church where, you know, someone was hired? Because most of the people that we hire, all of them really, I don't know. So I don't know what your background is. So one of my concerns is, are you going to disrupt the chemistry? Because sometimes when you get a good group of musicians together, there is a spiritual chemistry there that even transcends church. What do you do when you have to work with musicians that come in like they want to be the star, or there's not that sync there? How do you deal with that?
Man, it's we're fortunate because the process that we go through, if we do have to bring someone in, we're very intentional about interviewing and finding out where people are and what they do because of those exact reasons. Like, we want people that can come in and be an asset to the environment, be an asset to the team. And me personally, as band director, I'm okay if someone's not a good fit. I'm good with you not being a part of what we're doing, regardless of your skill.
How do you deal with that though? If there's you don't feel a chemistry there, or?
I mean, sometimes you have to work to build that chemistry. Because even when we first all started playing together, like, we still had kinks and stuff that we had to work out. That just takes time when you're serving with a team. You know, that takes time to do. But at the same time, every person that's a part of the team has to be humble enough to know that what we all bring to the table is for the betterment of the band, and so that we can serve and play the roles that we have. You know what I mean? And so when people don't have that, I mean, you're not a good fit. Like, if you're thinking about a corporate job, if you're not a good fit for the corporate job that you're working in, it costs us money, time, and investment and energy, and it actually is a detriment to the team for us to continue to keep you there if you're not willing to come up to the standards that we play at. You know.
Well, let's close with this. Let's talk about money matters. We've talked about compensation and the like, but Anthony mentioned this. I want to go ahead and ask. If you play at a church, and like Jaylen said, this is my home church, do you feel that it should be a requirement, if you're receiving a paycheck from that ministry, that you tithe to that ministry?
I think if you're a member of that church, then yes.
Okay.
If you're getting fed from that church, absolutely. If you are committed to that church, absolutely. If you are not a member of that church, then I think that is your choice. And if the pastor or leadership feels otherwise, then y'all should have a conversation about that and kind of get that under the discussion. But that's as far as I can go with that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I agree. Tithing is a heart thing. Yeah. At the end of the day.
And it doesn't have to be a tithe, you know, because we preach that, you know, if you don't tithe, you curse.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And I think that's done more harm than good in some instances. Yeah. But go ahead, Ed. I didn't mean.
Good. I think a man convinced against his will is still unconvinced. So
say that one again.
A man convinced against his will is still unconvinced.
Okay.
Meaning, like, if I have to force you to do something or I have to require you to do something, then your heart isn't in doing it anyway. Right. So you're still gonna buck the system, and the spiritual good that it's supposed to do, it's not gonna do anyway because your heart condition is wrong. You know what I mean? So in those terms, like, yeah, if you're getting fed from that church, if that's what you call your home church, and that's where, you know, you feel like that's the place where you're planted to be and God is speaking to you and ministering to you there, yeah, sow into that church, tithe into that church, sow into that church, whatever that may be. But, you know, if that's not the place where you're being fed from, and you and God have that worked out, talk to the pastor and talk about those things. It's good to have an open dialogue about those things, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to have clean hands and a pure heart, and we all want to know that there's nothing that's hindering our relationship than keeping us from being able to serve at the highest level. You know?
One other thing I want to close out, because really we're out of time. I want to put you guys in a pastor's position. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So you're the pastor. You got a great set of musicians, and they're professional musicians, and you understand that. But do you think it could be a problem if you have a musician who plays in a secular capacity, and it's kind of like some crazy, freaky stuff that they're doing as it relates to what they're doing in the world, and then coming back and putting on that spiritual thing and playing in the church? How would you handle that as a pastor?
Man, that's a great question. Because
now, let me tell y'all why I asked y'all.
Sure, please.
I had a situation once where somebody called me, but this person wasn't a musician; they were a singer, right? And they were singing, and they sent me a tape I don't know if y'all remember the Parliament House. Y'all remember
Okay.
the Parliament House, which was a gay club. And this dude had on a gold mask and a gold outfit. Don't start over there. He had on a gold mask, and he was performing at the Parliament Club, right? But then coming back on Sunday and singing at the church. And I had a problem with it because I'm like, we were doing television ministry, so you're seen there, and then you're also seen there. Again, putting you in my spot as the pastor. How would y'all handle it?
The misrepresentation of the brand. So think about it.
What would you say?
Misrepresentation of the brand.
Okay.
So let's think about it, because there's a whole spiritual side, and that's a whole nother conversation that will last longer than we have battery for on these cameras. However, if you think about it strictly from a business perspective, right? As the pastor being a CEO of a business, if any one of my employees is misrepresenting the brand that I have worked so hard to build as my company, we see this happen all the time in the corporate arena. People have no problem being fired and let go. Like CEOs have no problem firing and letting people go from misrepresenting a brand, right? And so if you think about it, as the pastor of a church, the brand that we have is Christ. That's the brand that we're trying to bring people into, to recognize and to sell them on. It's the brand of salvation in Jesus Christ. If you're misrepresenting the brand, you're now doing harm to the representation of not just our church, but of our
Christianity
brand and
at
Christianity
large.
as a whole. And that, to me, is a problem. That's a place where we kind of have to draw a line. We have to make some decisions about what we're doing. You got to be yay or nay, And that's not to say that they're a bad person. They might be struggling with something, whatever the case may be. Hey, let's walk with you through that, outside of you being up in front of people misrepresenting the situation.
So can you be, and Jaylen, I want you to deal with this because you come from a Christian background with your grandmother and whatnot. Can you be sanctified and play at a church and yet get into a secular position and not expect to be checked or rebuked about that?
When you say checked or rebuked, what do you mean?
Like the situation that we just talked about, where you're at church and you're doing something at church, but on Sunday we see you on national TV, not Sunday, but we see you on national TV doing something that looks nothing like Christ, Do you think the pastor should check you on that or call you on that? So
putting myself in your shoes or in a pastor's shoes, I feel like
Gotta have a conversation.
that has to be a conversation.
Gotta have a conversation.
If I am the pastor and I know what the vision for this house is, the brand of this house is, I know what I do want and what I don't want. And the people that I bring in leadership or in a ministry position, I have to be upfront, and that has to be clear and talked about before I hire them. If it's not clear and upfront before I hire them and then I find out later on, then I will present the conversation as, hey, this is a problem for me. I don't really want that as a representation of this ministry. And now if they keep going, then we have to, then we have to, okay, boom. But if it's not a conversation that they need a second chance or whatever the case may be, but I think there is definitely room for rebuke and check in those types of scenarios, definitely, for sure.
Well, listen, I just want to say thank you guys for coming on and doing this section or segment of the podcast, because this is just one segment. We're going to have another segment with musicians where Anthony's going to host, because he's a musician himself, and just talk about some things that I'm not familiar with. And so I just want to say thank you guys for coming on, and thank you for being a blessing to the River of Life Christian Center of Orlando. And I want to say to our viewing audience, thank you for tuning in to another podcast of The Agenda. And remember, we'll be here same time next week talking about other provocative subjects that affect the culture, the church, and Christianity. Until we see you again, may God's richest and best be yours. Peace.